From Michigan Public, this is It's Just Politics. I'm Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
Today, huge campaign cash heads to Republican Mike Rogers.
Senator Elissa Slotkin heads to Iowa.
And the everlasting question, what's next for Governor Gretchen Whitmer once she leaves office? Here to answer that question and much more are Jason Rowe, political strategist and former executive director of the Michigan Republican Party. Jason, hey.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
And Portia Roberson, CEO of Focus Hope and vice chair of the Michigan Democratic Party. Portia, welcome back to It's Just Politics.
Hello.
Thanks so much for having me. Glad to be back.
Okay, so Jason, let's start with the Republican-affiliated Senate Leadership Fund announcing they're going to put $45 million into Michigan's open U.S. Senate race on behalf of Mike Rogers. Can you put that kind of money into context?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a strong statement about how important this race is, other than the incumbent races that they'll be spending money on. This race in Georgia and New Hampshire are really the three that Republicans are eyeing as the best opportunity for a pickup. And quite frankly, some of the incumbent senators are actually in danger. And so I think there is an effort to look for offsets to losses in that 53-47 majority that Republicans have. But this Senate Leadership Fund commitment is, I think, the beginning, because we still have the National Republican Senatorial Committee that I expect will come in with many millions. And the one state that we're probably in Michigan competing with the most is Georgia. They've got a very complicated Republican primary, and there's not a lot of optimism that the first-term senator there, John Ossoff, can be beat. So we could see a lot of that SLF money come back to Michigan, even beyond what they've announced.
Jason says it's the beginning. I think it's the beginning of the end. There is no possible way elections should cost this much money. I mean, obviously, I get the fact that they're going to put this kind of money in it because they think this is a seat that they can flip. But we talk a lot about wanting younger people to get involved in politics and like what the next generation of leadership looks like. And how is that even going to be possible when we have to tell a potential candidate who's interested in getting involved in government and serving people that, hey, you have to raise a significant amount of money and hope that somebody comes in and spends another $45 million for you to win? It's so crazy to me.
Well, and I don't disagree with Portia. I would say, as a campaign consultant, one of the frustrating things that we find ourselves doing is running two races. And the first race is to catch the attention of those super PACs that will make very unemotional decisions on who the winners and losers are and spend money based on how you're polling. And so it forces campaigns to spend money early, not to communicate with voters, but to move their poll numbers up so that those groups spend money. And then you're basically turning over your campaign to the outside groups that their spending is disproportionate to what the candidate spending is. And you will find the candidates often have the smallest voice in defining their own candidacy.
I'm literally nodding my head, Jason, because you're right. And I mean, we talk about not having people go to Congress or the Senate and really think about, serving people rather than just serving the PACs that have given them such an incredible amount of money. They then direct how that person is going to serve. And I think, that's the quandary, I guess, would be the lightest word I can use of where we find ourselves these days.
Okay, so you defined the problem. What's a solution?
Well, the solution is not going to be a politically popular solution. The reality is that with the limitations that candidates have on the amounts of money that they can raise, and it's capped, a lot of most of the spending comes from these dark money groups that the candidates don't control and have any influence over. Even telling them not to do what they're doing is technically a violation of campaign finance law. And I think the only way you take the oxygen out of these super PACs and other outside groups is to raise the limits pretty substantially for what a candidate can raise and spend themselves. And that, kind of takes out the need of those other dollars. Candidates, when it comes to advertising on television, get a much lower rate that's typically about a third the cost of what these super PACs will pay when they spend. But it would put the candidates back in control of their own campaigns and their own message, and not be, little tiny boats in an ocean being tossed around by the waves of money that have nothing to do with them, whether it is against them or for them.
Yeah, the only issue with that is that there's so many good people out here on both sides who would be interested in politics who don't have access to building their own, using their own rather personal money to be able to overcome what PACs would totally put into a race. And so you've got a lot of folks who, again, would have to look, and we talk a lot about getting those who are, already wealthy when they decide to run for office. And I think we're going to see more of that rather than less of that, because the only people who can really compete with the PACs and with the money that's coming from the PACs are going to be people who already either are wealthy or who have wealthy contacts, personal contacts.
I second that.
Yeah. Well, let's turn to Iowa. That's where U.S. Senator Elissa Slotkin was this past week, spurring continued headlines that she is interested in running for president. She was asked about 2028. She did not rule it out. What do you make of these very early moves?
Well, I mean, there is no heir apparent for Democrats on who could be the nominee. I mean, you've got 4 governors that I think at least appear centrist. You have 2 that I think, while they might be doing well in the polls, Newsom and Pritzker, I don't think would fare very well in a general election, and I don't think would necessarily survive a vigorous Democratic primary. But there's a lot of other people. Chris Murphy, senator from Connecticut, is another who I think kind of fits that appearance of centrist profile. And Slotkin, obviously. I mean, Slotkin has won now 4 races in 50-50 districts. I think the kind of untold story, and maybe the why I don't think Slotkin's quite as great as everybody else thinks, is that she in every one of her races has dramatically outspent her opposition and has always just barely cracked 50% or even less. I mean, in her first race, she outspent her opponent 2-1, her second 3.5-1, her third 4-1. Mike Rogers 2 years ago, 4-1. And against Mike Rogers, he still only got 48.6% of the vote, only winning by 19,000 votes. If you leveled up the money in the races that she's been in, we wouldn't be talking about her. Having said that, she is a talented retail politician. She has a real grasp of foreign policy issues. And I think that's one of the things that sometimes complicates Democrats is their how they articulate foreign policy issues. So I think she has some strengths there. She's from a very important purple state. So you can't discount her, but I think that she is far more resume than she has actual political potency.
A couple things. One of the things that was interesting to me coming out of her conversation in Iowa was that she said she would get in it if she didn't see anybody else who she thought was ready to lead, which I found interesting because, as Jason mentioned, there are probably 10 people that I could name off the top of my head who have already sort of made their case for why they should be the next president. And so it's interesting that maybe that was a little bit of like, I still don't see out of those 10 that there's somebody viable in the race. I do think, she's a prolific fundraiser. So that obviously lends itself to what we just mentioned about being able to raise the kind of money. I don't know that right now she's ready for the national stage. And I'll say the quiet part out loud. I don't know that the country's going to elect a woman in this next run. So I think those will all be considerations that I think a lot of women who are thinking about it will have to take into consideration. We haven't seen it so far. There's got to be a first, but I don't know if it's going to be in this next cycle.
And Portia, I guess the question too, is Slotkin the kind of centrist Democrat that the party base wants or needs right now?
Well, I think that's the conflict that we're all dealing with, right? There are those who think that staying in the center is the path forward. And there is a large progressive contingency that says stop with the old and what we've been doing in the past and let's start doing something new. And I think there have been some races that have pointed to that being successful. So I think this is what's going to be hashed out over the next 2 years or so. Who's the right person and who's the person who can energize Democrats in a way that they get out and really campaign for and ultimately vote for our Democratic nominee.
And I think both parties are wrestling with, what are the definitions of our ideological bases? Conservative used to meant what you thought and how you voted, and now it is how you behave. And I think you could say the same for liberals. And, what I've found in the era of Trump within the Republican Party is your voting record doesn't define your conservatism, how loudly and obnoxiously you can pound your chest and, claim your fidelity to Donald Trump. It makes you a conservative. And if you are any degree civil, you are somehow a rhino. So I think her record is appealing to progressives, but I think that progressives are looking for someone that is going to be more of an agitator and a disruptor than they are someone who's going to vote for the things that they agree with.
That is Jason Rowe. He's a political strategist and former executive director of the Michigan Republican Party. And Portia Roberson is here, CEO of Focus Hope and vice chair of the Michigan Democratic Party.
So meanwhile, Governor Whitmer was asked that question, what's next for her? At the Michigan Chronicle's Pancakes and Politics, her response, and I quote here, "I don't know that I'll put my name on the ballot again," but then she goes on to say, "I've got a lot of gas in the tank and I'm going to stay active one way or the other." Portia, what do you hear when you hear the governor answer that way?
I think she's keeping her options open, to be honest. I mean, I think that's what I've been hearing for the last year or so. There was a point where I was pretty sure that she was going to be one of the people trying to get the nomination. But in recent months, I've heard that that's not something she wants to do. We're going to have at our convention, Andy Beshear is going to be our legacy dinner speaker. But we're also having Vice President Kamala Harris and Senator Cory Booker in town. So there's going to be a lot of people in her state talking about and making the case for why they might be thinking about running for president. And so with the way things are going, we're going to have to figure it out sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think, from my perspective, I don't think there's any question that she would like to run. And I think she has been behaving as someone that's positioning to run. But I do think there are some flashing yellow lights that could be an impediment for her running, and whether she's running to be a presidential candidate or a vice presidential choice, her ability to deliver Michigan for Jocelyn Benson is the big question. And I think it's interesting. You mentioned Governor Beshear. He is the chairman of the Democratic Governors Association. Governor Whitmer is the vice chairman. Their job is to elect Democrats in the 50 states and territories. And she has yet to endorse Jocelyn Benson, even though Benson has the appearance of a fait accompli. And I think it is a political calculation that if she cannot deliver her state for Democrats in 2026, and I believe Mike Duggan complicates that math for them,
Sure.
she's going to look really weak, and it's going to be hard for her to make an argument that she should run for president or be someone's vice presidential pick. And you compare that to J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, who just spent many millions of his own dollars to win a number of races. In fact, every race in Illinois on the March 17th primary that he played in, he won. And I was there that week. And that week, he was already running statewide TV ads in a state that he's going to win by double digits. And I realized the reason he's doing that is because the Chicago media market bleeds into Iowa. And so he's clearly positioning himself. So you're going to see, I think, amongst Midwesterners, a lot of candidates that think that they're the ones.
Portia, what should we make of the fact that Governor Whitmer has not endorsed in the Democratic primary for governor, or also came out and said she's not going to endorse in the Secretary of State race before the Democratic convention coming up? And that's her own lieutenant governor running in that race.
Yeah, I think it got complicated because somebody from her administration, in addition to the lieutenant governor, has her name in the hat for Secretary of State. I think there's a good possibility we'll see an endorsement after the convention. I mean, we'll have a nominee then, right? So I think she'll come back and get behind those candidates. Look, Gretchen Whitmer has never shown herself to be anything but a strong Democrat. She's now, as Jason mentioned, the vice chair of the Governors Association. And I think she'll get behind Democrats pretty heartily as we go into the full swing. I think she's been sort of holding her powder, so to speak, and letting what we like to do. And, we like to let it all flesh itself out, and then she'll get on board and help to elect Democrats up and down the ticket.
Jason, finally, let's jump over to the Republican gubernatorial campaign, the group of folks who want to succeed Gretchen Whitmer. Jason, what is going on with the John James campaign for governor?
Well, unfortunately for them, I think they put themselves in a death spiral.
Really?
Yeah, I think they early on kept trumpeting a 50-point lead over the rest of the field, which was an artificial lead because John has run statewide twice. He's run in the largest media market in the state twice. And so arguably there's more than $200 million that have been spent in this state elevating his name ID. There's not a lot behind that. They know the name. They don't necessarily know the man. And if you run around saying you have a 50-point lead, there's only one direction that can go, and that's down. And so you have polling in the last few weeks that shows him down in the mid-20s, in large part because of Perry Johnson's very excessive spending. About $17 million will be spent in 6 weeks. There's polls out there that basically show this neck and neck. And I think if a poll were to come out this week, it would show John probably trailing compared to Perry Johnson. I think it's a number of self-inflicted wounds, this not appearing at events with the other candidates. They came out a couple weeks ago and said that after the filing deadline, when we know who the candidates are, we will participate. And they just canceled an appearance with the other candidates in Oakland County well after the filing deadline. And so he's just taking on more water. And the problem is, by skipping all of these party functions, he's really kind of aggravated the activists. And so he got booed at the state party convention. I think there's a legitimate fear within his campaign that they're going to be booed at county level events. And so I think they're trying to avoid that. But I say a death spiral because when you are on the decline and your strategic decision is to avoid engaging with the people that you need to be behind you, that is not a great sign. That tends to get worse before it gets better. I don't think Perry Johnson's any exceptional candidate, but there's a vacuum that nobody can match his spending. And so he's going to be driving this conversation for a while. And I think really of the remaining three candidates, Eric Nesbitt, Mike Cox, and Tom Leonard, the only one likely to be able to spend any significant money and be the third option is Eric Nesbitt. And he may end up seeing some support moving his way compared to two other candidates that other people might consider pretty flawed.
I'll just add too, I know that, the standard is usually that an independent candidate pulls from Democrats. I will tell you that I think it gets much more difficult for an independent candidate if the nominee is not John James.
Say more.
Yeah, why is that?
Well, to be very candid, I think race plays a factor. I think that Republicans have their own concerns about independent candidacies. And I think that when it comes down to it, if there is someone that they feel comfortable with and that they are assured is a Republican, they will go in the booth and pull for that person. I think John, as Jason said, has put himself in quite a predicament. And to hear that he's getting booed at his own convention doesn't bode well for him. And I think that, there are a lot of people who are concerned. But if there's another candidate that they can vote for, and Perry Johnson is spending a lot of money and to get his name out there and to be on air already, I think if they have that option, there's a good chance that they'll just go with him rather than switching over to an independent.
Well, we could continue for hours talking about all of this with you two, but that is all the time we have for now. That is Portia Roberson. She is CEO of Focus Hope and vice chair of the Michigan Democratic Party, and Jason Rowe. He is a political strategist and former executive director of the Michigan Republican Party. Thanks so much, you two.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, guys.
And just a quick note before we go today, It's Just Politics is heading to Italy. That's right, we're heading for 2 weeks with a group of Michigan public travelers. You can find out more about traveling with this station at michiganpublic.org/travel. In the meantime, that is It's Just Politics for today. I am Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
Let's talk again in 2 weeks.